Hi, quick intro before the interview with Andrew starts. I am very excited to have done this interview, again, courtesy of YouTuber Outsider12. On the Digital Bloodlines page, you may have seen that we asked what questions you would ask of a Season 1 writer for Witch. Did get them in there. There were some questions that were answered in his book, Valuable Lessons, which I'll quickly go over before we start the interview, just because I didn't want to make him repeat things. Yes, there was some backlash from religious communities about the name Witch, which is typical. The reasoning for Cornelia's behaviors and really everyone else's language and everything is really just a result of it being written for the 2000s, which is what they were writing it for at the time, trying to reach that current demographic. Really everything else is pretty much covered in the upcoming interview. I asked about 10 questions, but he gave me so much more information than I could have ever hoped for, so please enjoy. Hi.
Good to see you. Oh, there's the girls in the background.
Yep.
I didn't have any witch art, or I didn't think of grabbing any, so I just got a piece of colorful, cartoony looking stuff for the background.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. How did you get started on the project? How did you get involved?
We had my writing partner and I, Daryl Vickers and I, we had worked together for a long, long time. By 2004, we've been working together for, 20 years or so. And so when you work in cartoons, which we'd done for a little while, doing a Fox cartoon and some other stuff, an HBO thing, you just take a lot of meetings and people do get to know you. And just from taking the meetings where they don't hire you, they become familiar with your work. They maybe have seen a resume and a little stuff, some action and some comedy. And when the Witch comic book started, it was in Europe, with Britain, France, and Italy, 2000 or 2001, I think. And it quickly it was the fastest selling comic book in the world. It was selling 1 million copies a month. And it was owned by SIP, which is a print arm of Disney. And we know the folks at Disney. So when they decided that they wanted to turn this into a show, they had a pretty short timeline. So they wanted people who worked fast. And they had decided at first, because of the comedy in the comics, especially Irma and Cornelia, and the goofiness of running into the world of Meridian, that they wanted it to be funny. So Gary Marsh, the president of Disney, called us and asked if we'd be interested, and said there was a lot of action in it, and it's not all comedy, but we do need that element, a lot of it. So we said, sure, what does that involve? And he sent us the first year's comics, 20 plus issues, and said, I think this is too much for a series. There's way too much happening. You will want to slow it way down so it'll last a couple of years. And we said, I guess our agent negotiated a fee. And what does this involve? And they said, well, you're going to have to go to Paris. Oh, boo-hoo. So we went to Paris and met the director, Mr. Gordon Bates, and then all the people who'd have been involved in the comic, and also people from Britain and people from Italy and France and some from America, all of us, to tell us what they would want in a show, because they all had to play it in their countries. And we decided, I think, like the big thing was you couldn't show any currency. If people can't hand money over in an international, I can't remember what money was shown in the comics or if we noticed it, but we also couldn't say miles, for example, or use Fahrenheit. We had to have kilometers in Celsius because it was mostly Europe. And after a week or so in Paris and meeting in a conference room every day and asking a lot of questions, we said, okay, we're in, let's go. And started the process of bringing on a staff and getting sound people and deciding on the music and picking the artists and the studio that they were going to use. And eventually, so this was all 2004, and got it launched in the spring of 2004. Being aired in so many different places, sometimes some country would get a 6-month leap on it. It depended on what they had that was being canceled or coming to its end at that time, where they could suddenly start a new show. In animation in particular, it's not uncommon to see something that you've written begin airing 3 years in advance in Singapore or in Hong Kong. And because you don't get residuals in animation, it's not something the Writers Guild has ever managed to get covered. The only way that you find out about it usually is some friend comes back from vacation and said, "Did you do a show called Witch? I thought I saw your name and I was in Bolivia or I was in China." And you go, "Yeah, is that airing?" I don't remember at the time. I remember being surprised going to McDonald's one day and seeing the dolls for the girls, which was the gift with the Happy Meal that day. I hadn't realized that it was playing that big, that Disney had spent that much money on promoting it. The writers don't always, we didn't even get free copies of the tapes or the DVDs at the time. You come in, you do it, you leave.
You had mentioned they wanted it to maybe last a couple years. Well, I know
Yeah.
it always depends on how well it does, I guess.
Yeah, it's very hard for them to look ahead. It's like planning a car that you're going to be making 3 years later, except TV usually gets done really quickly. It gets done quicker than books, for example. My wife's a novelist, and when they finish the book, it's not going to be in the bookstore for 3 years, which is crazy because TV is usually made and it's on the air within a month or two. That's because it costs so much. They borrow money to make the thing, to pay 200 people from the art department all the way down. Those people are on salary every week, doing that show and nothing else, and so they want to rush it to air. Usually, the participating countries, if there are a lot of countries chipping in, a few $100,000 per episode, maybe they're not in so much of a hurry. But on the writing is quite pressured. Yeah, you have to be delivering 1 script a week every single week, and then you're working 7 scripts ahead, and hiring the writers and deciding on the look and looking at test art and should her eyebrows look like this, and what do you think of Wilma's nose, and what do you think of Cornelia's nose, and did you picture her being this much of a blonde, and when we go into tunnels we're only going to be able to see Cornelia's hair, is that okay? And all those strange considerations that I guess movie people have to face all the time.
One character that a lot of people were curious about was Blunk, because he was added to the show.
Yeah, we had done a pilot with the Canadian comic Howie Mandel years earlier, about an elf, and it didn't go, but we gave the elf a silly alien friend called Blunk, and we owned that character. And Blunk was spoke funny and didn't understand English very well, and would steal stuff and try and resell it. So here we are 3 years later, trying to add comedy to a show where the girls are fairly serious and where Disney and the censors, the standards and practices won't let us make fun of education. You can't make fun of any kind of body shape or type. You can't say, can my superpowers get me out of geography? No, that's making fun of school. And so having a silly alien gave us a lot of room to goof around, and especially gave us someone who could antagonize Caleb.
Yeah.
And make life difficult for him, but whom he had to put up with because the guy knew how to find the portals. So we stuck him in pretty early and pitched him to Disney in the early meetings. The early meetings, you just got to picture, when they're going to mount something that's going to cost this much money. You're in boardroom with a table with 20 people sitting around it, and they go around and introduce each other, and they have all these jobs and you can't keep them straight, and they start asking you questions. And every department has some slightly different requirement. There's the toy department, of course, with animation. Can you give them this or that, or can they have cars? No, they can't have cars. They're 13. Well, how about bicycles, special bicycles? Well, we don't want to give their bicycles powers. And it goes around the table until you decide on everything and everybody is more or less on the same page. And then you have this list of things that you have to give everybody. And it was much harder on Barbie, which we did a few years ago, or on Hot Wheels, where you had to use, the cars had to do specific magical things. And they were going to sell, I think they sold the Heart of Kandrakar as a toy. And I'm not sure if they ever did the map as well. And everyone comes together and tells you what they want to be in the show and how they see it, and what they're testing especially shows. This was tested in Europe, and I think we took the early animatic to Phoenix. So I went down to Arizona and tried it with children there, with boys, then with girls, then with boys and girls together. And then you get this binder of information, and they say, okay, incorporate all of this. Some of it contradicts other things, like you might have a note from somebody saying the group needs a strong leader, because that's the person who's going to be in front and the other girls are behind her. And then someone else will say, well, our testing shows, in England or in Italy, that they all have to be side by side. So at that point, the showrunners, Daryl and I, would just look at it and decide what worked best for writing stories.
I remember reading that they wanted it to be a little more boy-friendly, which I think is why they made Caleb a human character that was around more.
Yeah. Yeah, and he hadn't shown up in the comics until later. I think he started in episode 6 or 7. We had said at the early meetings that we thought, since especially the whole witch transformation thing, except for Halen's grandma who knew, it was pretty important that nobody know, really. And then there was Matt, the little boyfriend characters. But as soon as you start letting humans know, you can sometimes find a human knowing as a useful thing. If it was the principal, for example, he could let them out of class on special passes. But we thought it would be a really good idea to limit that as much as possible and give us room to have people. Then you could have episode 20, so-and-so's mother finds out, and that could be a big deal. So Caleb, we thought shouldn't wait until the equivalent of the 6th episode. He really needs to be there early and maybe get him in trouble and have him be brave and daring. It had started as a girls-only, all-girls show. But yeah, should I talk a little about the transformation that happened in episode 7?
Oh, sure.
It originally was just going to be on Disney Channel, I think, or maybe on the Family Channel, which Disney and ABC had bought the Family Channel for like 50 some odd $billion. Something, no, it was $5.8 billion. Hadn't realized that due to a holding clause when the channel was founded in 1977, it always had to have the word family in it. So they could change it to Disney Family or The Family or Family Disney. So what they came up with instead was, while we were developing this show with all girls, they said we could cut a deal where we have a block in the evening or in the morning. And one of their blocks became known as Toon Disney, and one became known as Jetix, Jetix. And the Jetix channel, because of that crunchy, exciting X in there, was thought to be, this is going to be for boys. Boys will watch something called Jetix because it sounds like a jet and it's got an X and it's cool. So when we had written episodes through 6 and we're working on 7, we got a call. Michael Eisner, head of Disney, had decided to put this show on Jetix, and therefore we had to play down the girls and it had to be about boys. And I can remember the phone call saying, we got a show starring 5 girls, 6 if you count Elion. And there's some monsters. And so how do we? They said, well, just play up the monsters. Lots of monsters. Don't be too girly. I said, well, what do you mean don't be too girly? It's called Witch. It's Will, Irma. And they said, yeah, we know that. But they could certainly have to be in there. And don't make them more boyish. They're still cute and smart and powerful and aspirational. But add action, add silly fights, add Caleb. We love Caleb. Start the episodes with Caleb. So we went back, I think, and we did a re-rig of that first episode where Caleb is rolling the dynamite down the stairs of the castle, and move that right to the top of the episode. And then had the girls later. That actually worked pretty dramatically. You're on excitement and action and escape and arrows flying through the air. And then you're cutting to some girls, and Will's mother is saying, try to make friends, have an apple. And so that worked good for suckering everybody in. Then every episode became the same thing. Start with the action. And we would get notes saying, I don't know, this feels very feminine, this scene. Well, yeah, you've got these 5 girls, of course. That's what they're talking about. It wasn't really that much of a problem as it went on, because the way we had broken the thing down, slowly finding out about Elion, and then Elion finding out that she was heir to the throne, and then discovering that Cedric was running the bookstore in human disguise, and using the astral drops, the duplicates of themselves, which they could leave behind. Slowly, that began to seem more like an action show than a comedy show anyway. And with a series of discoveries, 26 episodes, discovering a little more every episode, the boys and the male characters were a pretty useful way of getting into it. And then by the time they were crossing into Meridian regularly, especially when they got that figured out with the map and started going for the final battle, everything just mixed together. It wasn't cutting from boy story to girl story and feeling awkward. It was just like, everybody's fighting. It was pretty fun to do. And as I said, having written together, Daryl and I, for 20 years at that point, had done only comedies, only talking ducks, and snakes, and we did Casper, for example. Mm-hmm. It was cool learning how to do it, structuring scenes to end with a scare. A train's about to go off a bridge instead of ending with jokes.
A lot of people seem to appreciate the extra stuff that you added to the world of Meridian. Some of the creatures that they found there, or even that Horn of Hypnos storyline that hypnotized them. People really like those added things in there.
Yeah, there wasn't quite enough. The comics, in a comic page, you have a close up of some character, and then you show where they are, and then the whole bottom of the page might be them walking down an alley, and then the next scene they're at dinner with the parents, and they say, "What did you get up to today?" And tight on the girl's eye, and she goes, "Nothing much." And it's the visual and quick moving nature of it. The reader doesn't really notice logical flaws either, and wouldn't, I don't think, put up with great big blocks of dialogue like if you tried to draw the series. But on the other hand, watching a linear narrative and watching people who you come to identify with and enjoy and like, and you know that, oh no, she's afraid of heights, or she's really nervous, or oh, she's the smart ass, she's going to say something. If you don't serve that, if Irma doesn't say something after the banana catches fire, a viewing audience feels cheated in the way that comic book audiences don't. And so I think taking those first 6 episode stories and spreading them out worked a lot more smoothly than I was afraid it might. And after it got going, there was so many episodes coming in and so much stuff that all the people who we thought would be reading everything very closely and giving notes, they just were too busy to supervise it too closely. So we were able to add the Lurdens, which gave us these hulking, which was great because they didn't talk, I don't think, or they grunted. They didn't do much talking, so you could have them in the frame, and you didn't have to explain why they didn't say anything. The sniffers and the larvax, the centipede-looking things crawling along. Yeah, and you can't just write for animation where you're almost like the writer and the director. You can't just write exterior, meridian, scary landscape. The director is in another country. They were directing it in France and do storyboarding it. You have to say, imagine the Grand Canyon, but the trees are weird and they're purple. And so you put a lot of that detail in. If you're describing the Infinite City, some of the stuff had already been spelled out and they knew it. They knew what those whisperers, the gardens of the black roses looked like because they had it in the comics. When we got to that, we would even sometimes just put bracket comic number 4, page 21. And that little description would save a lot of screen time. I remember with the circular prison and the underwater mines and the Infinite City and the garbage dump with the portal that led into the Infinite City. I remember trying to get the description as concise as possible. Daryl and I can't draw, so we would sometimes use examples of the sorts of things we meant. Like remember that Star Wars where the crusher, the garbage crusher, kind of like that, but with plants. We had a few questions that came back from the artists, but mostly I think they got it. I haven't seen all the episodes, but the ones I've seen, the monsters, all the additional material, it's pretty exciting to see. It's pretty cool to describe something and then you get these pages back and whoa.
We could talk about your favorite characters to write for.
Irma was the funny one. She was written as the smart aleck. And so it was fun, and we were also, having done mostly comedy, late night comedy, but a few cartoons, really gravitated to characters who can whip off that one line. Because also we could, because we were used to punching up other people's shows, we could give her alternates and then just write the 3 funniest things we could think of and let someone else decide, oh, this one's, we like this best. But Will also had that awkwardness, and also having power thrust on you when you're not even the one everybody knows. She was the new girl. Was nicely structured in the comics and made her a very good reactor character, so that when something ridiculous happened, Blunt comes up with garbage on his head. Cutting to Will gave us that sort of talk show host reaction thing with the eyes and the eyebrows, and you automatically know what she's like and what she's used to, and so you laugh. So writing those two was good. Cornelia got to be it was a Cornelia and Irma show, almost like back and forth between them. And Tarani was, if there was a dark cave, Tarani might be the one going, you know what, you guys go in, because somebody really should be watching the entrance. So everybody had some little thing, but I think Irma and Will were the most fun to write. Of course, you got into the creatures, which was not comic dialogue. We gave the writers a note in what they call the series Bible. You have to give the writers who are going to come in and just do one. You had to give them a description of the whole world so they don't write something so that the monster doesn't come in wearing a Mets cap or something. So I remember saying to them that Disney doesn't want any humor in the Meridian sequences. When the girls get there, if there's a battle and something goes wrong, you can go, no, you're right, no, my right, no, the right. You can have a little back and forth. But until then, you can't have Cedric and Phobos having jokes, unless maybe Blunk was stealing his robe from behind him or something. You maybe could have some slight situational stuff. But the dialogue for those character was all there at the West Portal. Quick, send your men so we may vanquish them. Not a lot of fun to write.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we hadn't spent years doing that. We had not yet done Hot Wheels, which was, incidentally, Hot Wheels Battle Force 5, Mattel, was very similar to this. It's 5 characters with super cars, in this case, instead of powers, who get together. And when they get together, there's these magic explosion of light, and the cars transform. And then they go through portals into another world where all the evil is, and they battle them. So this was good preparation for writing fighting cars 2 years or 3 years later. And you had asked, I think, one of the questions from fans that you had mentioned earlier was, did I think there was a chance of getting the team back together and doing more of this? It's possible to exploit a completed animated or live action show in other ways, like a theme park ride, because you don't have to get the whole gang back together. If people are sufficiently familiar with the property, I don't think Which never really got that much notoriety. And it is easier to get animation back together than live action, because everybody in live action has aged, and some of them are married, and the guys are bald, and the kids' voices are broke. It's very difficult to really assemble the whole crew again. I don't know what Kelly Staples and Candy Milo and all the voice people are doing. D. Bradley Baker's still working. He did the guy with a voice like this. It's very difficult to persuade a network or a studio to bring back something 10 years, in this case, 17 years later, because they're developing their own things. They spend all day, they drive into the studio and they read comics, and they're online and they're reading magazine stories and taking pitches from people like me, and then getting excited about and developing new ideas. And if someone says, oh, we're going to bring back Witch, for example, or I often get it with Jimmy Neutron or Fairly Odd Parents, if you put that on the air, that's taking up half an hour that they're really, really hoping their other new show would be on, where they actually are involved and invested in it. So there really is, I think Family Guy got canceled and brought back really quickly once. Seth MacFarlane just pointed out how popular it was, and it got picked up. But that everybody was still in place. They lost a few writers, but their animation team, their directors, everybody was still there. I don't even know if everybody involved in Witch, for example, including the storyboard people and the voice extras and the sound effects looping and the musicians, I don't even know if they're still in the business. Showbiz does have quite a high turnover. They say half of your competition quits every year. Although, having been on a show like this, probably most of those people are, Mark Gordon Bates is probably still directing animation.
I wonder if it would almost be able, it would probably have to be a complete reboot in terms of changing the art and everything.
Well, it would be interesting, for example, to have them all as women in their 30s. They have dispatched Meridian, finished off all those things, and now have the tales that one day they will tell their sons and daughters. Maybe one of them doesn't have kids and is married and is still dating, or is divorced and dating, and the others are either married or, and they've moved, they've left Heatherfield, and something happens. They got a phone call from Elion. And Elion, I thought you were in France. I'm back. Listen, we need to get together. Oh, sure. So what was I? You were dating so-and-so. What happened? Yeah, I'll tell you when we get there. And then you go to the old restaurant. I picked this place because no one ever comes here. Yeah, I noticed. I guess the waiters never come here either. So you'd have the comedy, the suspense, and you'd have them older. You wouldn't have to use the same voice artists because their voices would be different. You could write a whole new thing. The question at the network and studio would be, are people familiar enough with the first 52 episodes and what they went through and how they're related? And if I was pitching it, I would say, doesn't matter. No one was familiar with them when we started the first one. We got to meet them and saw their situations. And here we get to meet them all over again. And it's further down the road. And if you were to animate it the same way, which I don't know if that animation style, flash animation, how much of that there is, it's usually used for cheaper stuff. Almost everything is CG now. Even when it looks flat, it's still computer animated. But you could maybe use flashbacks to, remember the time we fought the Lurvex, and flashback to, and yeah, those were the days, man. That was before I got the arthritis, and that I would think would be doable, particularly as SIP and Disney and its animation and DEEC, the Disney International Company, would stand to make money off it and could license the intellectual property, the IP, again. But it'd be hard slog, because in any season there's 30 shows in development, 3 get on the air. I've been among the 27 many, many, many times and gone all the way through to finishing the first episode, and you've hired everybody and you've got people you love and you can't believe they wanted to do it. You've got guest stars, and then September comes along and they go, no, kids just didn't react to it. We got lucky.
Yeah, it would almost have to be an older version because I was in middle school when it was originally airing.
Yeah, well, what if you see them in their so in the original they were 13, and when they powered up, they advanced to 16 or 17, two ages. So they were 13 and 14 because there were two grades. They insisted on them being in two grades, which was tough. Because if they were in the same grades, we could see them in the same classroom, but they didn't want that. But you could have them get younger instead of saying, in other words, they could go from being 33 to being 22. Which would be cool and would be another type of fantasy fulfillment. And no kids, no babysitter.
Yeah.
I don't have Gerber everywhere. I could see it. Yeah, I've never seen a show where everybody just got younger as part of the spell. Yeah, well, we haven't. The last thing we did at Disney, I can't remember. We did a live action pilot there and a series called Deborah, a sitcom in 2011. But I'm not sure that I even know who to take a project to now. The last project I did was Nickelodeon, so those are my contacts, and you couldn't take it there. Where was Winx? Winx Club, was that on Nick? That was around the same time.
Possibly. I think it was on some Nick channels. I believe it was on 4Kids at one point.
Yeah, because I remember seeing the billboards for them as we were gearing up to air and thinking, wow, is that a coincidence or what? Of course, they had gone through the same procedure we had, except they hadn't had the comics, or did they? Was there Winx comics?
I don't think so. I know it's always been a competition between the two. I have a witch cup that has the characters on it, and I had it at work the other day, and somebody called it a Winx cup.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you struck them about the forehead with it.
Yeah. Well, because I know Disney was, how do I want to say it? We're involved in the creating of the graphic novels. And then also the show. And I was always wondering why it was so different, because they required different things for TV than for the book.
And also, when you say Disney, it's an enormous multinational with 390,000 employees around the world. And the book and graphic novel section, I don't even know if those people would regularly speak to anyone in the TV or network development or airing process. They wouldn't need to. They were funded, and they were in a different country, and they were set up to sell comics, to analyze the same sorts of things, trends for preteens and tweens, and decide what would appeal to them. But except for reporting to Michael Eisner, to the very, very top occasionally about what was in development, what it looked like, and how much it was going to cost, and how much it could expect to earn. And maybe projects in development would have to include a paragraph about, in the event of great success, here's how it would play in the theme park. But other than that, there wasn't much. I mean, you can't talk to 390,000 people every day and figure out what they're working on. So some little branch, including they had their own toy branch, would suddenly just have a success, and everybody else would just be on it like ants on a crouton. They would have to discover and catch up really fast. And so the people who developed it, whom we met in Paris that week, I never saw any of them again. I don't think we even saw the director again. Mark was British, and so stayed in England. There wasn't any need, because by then, 2004, the internet was up and working fast enough that we had, we didn't have Zoom calls, but we had pretty speedy file transfer, even for large packages of material like rushes or the animatics, where the flip book was put together with rough sound and sent, and I would get it on email, and then it would take a minute to download, and then look at it and say, they're supposed to be on a ski trip. Shouldn't somebody have skis on their shoulder? And so they would make that little adjustment. But an entirely different set of principles. The comics didn't, for example, have a standards and practices. You could have in the comics, Will go home and her mom is drinking a cup of coffee. You can't have coffee in a children's show, in a small child's show. There are words you can't say. There are situations which you could have Will walking down a dark alley, for example, and here's a noise, and then you've got a single street light, and then there's her shadow stretching along behind her, and that's great in the graphic novel, and that's part of the language, the formal language people who read those things have got used to. But the peril that's implied for parents watching their kids, making them think, oh, I'm only 12, but I can walk down a dark alley. No, there's a whole list of things, requirements, things to avoid tyranny, she couldn't start fire. And when she did start fire, it couldn't have any red visible in it. It was only the yellow part of the flames. All those things which didn't constrain the graphic novel people at all. They could make and say and do, no profanity, but they could have the kids, the girls, go more into what we think of as the real world and encounter real problems and have real frustrations and angers. And the bullies could really be mean and do mean things, which television, particularly Disney is really the standout for protecting kids. We couldn't have a lid on the dumpster that Blunk popped out of, because standards and practices said having a lid on a dumpster in an alley was a danger to children. What children? I don't know. I mean, we had them watching a TV show at one point where a bear on the cartoon, a bear pushes down a plunger and dynamite explodes, and they said we had to take that out because it was dangerous. Like, yeah, it's dangerous, but how are you going to get a bear to blow up dynamite in the real world? You can't. And being hardened veterans of TV at that point, even though we had to calm down some of our staff writers sometimes. What? Why can't we do that? We more or less understood what we were getting into, and even knew when we read the graphic novels, like, oh, we can't do that. Oh, that's no way. I don't think I had any surprises of that sort. And I think when Gary Marsh chose us to work on it, we'd been through all those discussions with him on other shows that hadn't gone. We knew the rules.
There's a lot I hadn't really thought of, that they had the different standards because they can do different things in there.
Yeah. And you can have somebody in a comic fall off a roof and then oof, and they land in a rose bush, and then ow, what? Oh, it's just a thorn. It's okay. So where are we going now? If you do that live, so that's a drawing on the roof, and then flying through the air, and then the bottom panel, oof, and then you turn the page, and the action continues. But if you do that live, we invest ourselves more in people who are walking and talking in front of us. And if someone falls off the roof, they don't just get up and go, okay, now where are we going? It just feels fake. It feels too fast. It feels rushed. People talk about things like, whoa, I thought I was going to be driving you to the hospital. Yeah, I know. Boy, lucky that bush was there. They have to have all that talk to protect people's ideas of what people would do in those situations. You have to have believability. And what I always talk about is the lock. And the lock in this series, for girls who don't want to get involved with monsters, it's a responsibility. It's a great, serious responsibility that's been handed to them. And that was the importance of Halen's grandma in the opening, is that a serious adult tells them, this is what you're doing now. And I think kids that age get that. So you weren't going to have like Cornelia going, well, forget this. Thanks. Bye. Going to summer school. They were locked in early on with all of the fun, but also all the duties that entailed. Even though in the real world, there's no way you get 5 kids working together on the same. It's hard enough to even get them working on a science project together. But you lock them together, you make them friends, you make them realize they depend on each other. The comics did a pretty good job of that, of showing us who the girls were, but it didn't really show all the interaction that dialogue and walking down the street and talking on the phone and all that stuff can help add to really flesh them out. So when you finish 26 of them, you really feel like you know them.
One thing I also wanted to ask about was, in the graphic novel, they had more powers at the start. And I believe they gradually got more as the series went on.
Yeah. The diminution of powers when you switch to TV is it goes hand in hand with the lock, in that you want people to not be able to leave, but you also want them to be not so powerful that they don't all just fly away or anticipate what's going to happen. Halen could hear, she had control of air in the comics. She could hear things at an enormous distance, any vibration. She could hear somebody talking or planning against them. And as we turned the pages and saw these amazing powers, Cornelia with the soil, she could feel something growing and realize that someone had planted something. That means that's not an unplanted field. That means they're watering. That means there are people there. Mm-hmm. It's great in the comic where you just do it and it's done with. But when you get to a battle, you have to have them in real trouble. But if they can fly and speak to appliances Will could speak to appliances, and she could understand electronics and listen to them, and they would tell them the story, tell her, a fridge could tell her who had been there. It was just too much. They were too capable. It was hard to believe in any moment that they would have trouble. Yeah. It was hard to believe going to a commercial. They would, they'll They'll hear the people talking in the other town, and then we'll all listen to the appliances, and then Halen can blow over a power pole, and that can send power to the electric gate and stop the train. And when you're writing and anticipating an audience saying those same things, like, whoa, what are you talking about? They can fly. We even had once we got notes on one story where they were stuck somewhere with a low ceiling, and the network note said, well, why don't they just fly away? He said, exactly, that's the problem. We have to engineer them into situations. This is why Superman has kryptonite. It's not because it's a cool thing to have kryptonite. It's like if he has every superpower all the time, there's no stories. You can solve every problem immediately, and you need 30 minutes. So we got rid of the telepathy. There was some talk about invisibility early on, and I said, I don't know about that. There was some talk about them all being able to fly amazingly, but we wanted Will to have a little more trouble with it. There were a few other things where they had this list of abilities. She can do this, she can do this. And I thought, at a single moment where a bad guy is coming towards them on train tracks, if we go to that list, I can find a way to get them out of it with their amazing powers, and I shouldn't be able to. I have to go, oh no, man, they're really in trouble. We need something. We need Blunk to come along. We need Caleb to run up with his science project and use the volcano to do something. We need to involve other characters. We did have to talk to them. We spoke to them early on. We also talked to them about Tirani and the fire, because having done fire in other shows, I know how hard it was to get real fire in there. And when we were in Paris still, we said, they're not going to go for this. It looks great, her setting fire to things. And in fact, we had her set fire to a banana. Maybe it was a wax banana or a real one in the introductory skills session. And Disney wanted to cut it because they said it was well known that some people tried to smoke bananas to get high. I said, well known to who? I never heard of that. What, did you find that on Wikipedia? That's not even a thing, but they had heard it somewhere. And so you can't set fire to things that close. And she could also, said Will had great intuition, and there's one of them who could talk to animals. And oh, great! Now you got to get rid of all the dogs and cats, or else they would just ask the cat which way do they go, and the rats and the ants. And you're giving people abilities, but part of the ability to generate comedy and crisis, which often go really hand in hand, is restrictions. If they're too potent, if they're too powerful, if they can do anything, the audience is just going to go, well, that's ridiculous. That's not a problem. And we wanted real problems. So that was the reason for that.
Yeah. My favorite change is probably that they were all able to fly, because in the graphic novel, their wings were pretty much aesthetic in the beginning. Only Halen could fly. So I like that they could fly in the show. It made sense.
Yeah. That's such a fantasy. Everybody at every age, I didn't see how we could completely get away with it. And I can't remember if the comics rolled it in slowly, because I remember that Will was having a lot of trouble. But that was still comical. I mean, they all had trouble in the first and second episodes, when they were trying to figure out how to save Caleb. Yeah, but if they can fly, and there was some question too about, what did the map do? The map told them originally where all the portals were, but we needed Blunk, because if they know where all the portals were, and I could never understand the biggest problem, and I brought it up in France, and they just said, I don't know, deal with it the best you can, was if they can open portals and there are people suffering in Meridian, poor people suffering terribly in mud huts with no food and no heat, why don't they go through and bring a couple out? And at least they could sit at the train station and use the vending machines at the train station in Heatherfield. Why don't they ever save anybody? They just said, they can't do everything. I said, yeah, I know, but we're going to have an episode where they go to the park and throw a Frisbee. We're going to have an episode where they go to the water and they're dabbling in the water and swimming, and Cornelia's trying to teach Tirani how to swim. And why wouldn't a compassionate audience member say, you could find the map and go and save some people, one family? That was just not answerable, any more than it was in any of the shows with magic, like Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. When you travel on that level of comedy, though, and silliness, I don't think the audience expects Jeannie or Samantha in the witch in that show to be constantly saving people's lives. But in a drama which is about saving people's lives, it took a bit of fancy footwork to get around that implication.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, actually. Yeah.
There were a few funny little incidents. I can remember, because the French for film is pellicula, like in the Spanish. We had written something in one of the scripts which had to be translated for the French storyboard artists, about somebody having a film of something. But pellicule is also dandruff flake in French, and the storyboard came back with someone covered with dandruff. So I remember going, what is this? And then I have a little French because I'm Canadian going, wait a minute, French film dandruff. Oh, pellicule. Yeah, no, it's not dandruff. Somebody had read it in the French and then drawn it in the French. And also we had a friend who was going to punch up the series and had jokes, a stand-up comic named Steve Billitzer, and we cut a contract for him to join us about episode 7. But that was just when the decision was made not to make the show funny, to make it more dramatic. And so poor Steve got a contract and then was never hired. And we played the comedy down. And then, of course, Daryl and I were replaced for season 2 because they wanted to change the direction of the show to be less comic, although they could have told us to be less comical. But Greg Weisman came in and I'm told did a great job. And I know Nicole Dubuque, too, who worked on the second season. She had a great time with it.
They were a little more open to more humor in the second season, it looks like.
That's interesting. Because they never called us. Well, it would have been embarrassing. After you replace people, you can't call them up and say, can you go in and help Greg Weisman? And also, we were onto a different series. We were doing Fairly Odd Parents, I think, by then. So really rolling out the laughs. Or Casper, the Casper Scare School for a couple of years. Oh, I should also get this in, that after we were flown to Paris, they booked a hotel. You'll show up at the airport, and then you take a taxi to this beautiful West End hotel just off the Champs-Élysées. And when we checked out, they said to us, "Oh, Monsieur Nicholls, Monsieur Vickers, ici le compte." And I said, "What? No, Disney's going to pay for this." And they said, "No, Disney has not paid for anything." And we got a bill for $4,000 for the hotel. And we said, "No, there's some mistake. We're guests of Disney." "Oh, Disney, they made the appointment." I said, "Reservation? Yeah, we know, but we thought they were paying for it. We just came here to do a job." And I don't know. And then there's all your meals, and then so we had to pay $4,000 for the hotel before we had started, before we'd been paid anything, and then flew home and explained to them, and they paid us. I think they paid us back slowly over 6 months. Every job's a job, right? I mean,
yeah.
Every job has somebody who's going to make trouble for you. Although, for the most part, I think the story artists on this thing, the voice people, because we were there for all the voice records, you write it first, then you go into the studio, and then we sat while the actors and actresses came through, all the guest parts. They were great. And little Kelly Stables, who was Will, had just come off The Ring, the Japanese horror film, where she was the crawling monster with the streaky black hair crawling out of a well. So that was kind of freaky. That was you?
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And I had worked with some of the other people on other shows, always doing sillier stuff, playing a talking grapefruit or something. And then to see them come in, all these people we'd worked with, and we would just work with the director, Jenny McSwain, I think was the director on that. And she did an amazing job of getting all the growls, but also getting the humor. And then they take the audio, time it to exactly 21 minutes and 36 seconds, I think we had with commercials. And then that goes to the artist. So they time, the mouth would say, "I can't believe this." So they get the exact time, 1.2 seconds, and then the mouth has to go, "I can't believe this." And all the work, all that amazing work, plus all the backgrounds, creating a world out of nearly nothing. They did have some backgrounds. Heatherfield looked pretty good, I thought. It wasn't as detailed or as beautiful as it is in the comics. There's a thing with that kind of animation where if the background looks too good, the foreground characters look crummy. They look like they're made out of paper. So you've got to lower you see this background I've got here this is a photo I took at the Toronto Textile Museum, these bright colors. I thought this would be good for talking about comics. But if you have that much color in the background, you have to have even more color in the foreground or your characters don't stand out. People are looking at the background instead and going, "Oh, look at that street lamp. That is so cool." You don't want to be looking at the street lamp. When you do cartoons, you learn so much so fast about drawing people's attention to things and holding their attention and what works for comic characters that doesn't work in real life, doing which was really cool. And it's still really, except for Hot Wheels perhaps, the only non-comedy, the only show with a lot of drama and fighting in it that I've written. So we got to write fights as well. She throws the flaming thing and it hits the barrel of dynamite, and then the dynamite doesn't immediately explode. We cut to his face. Phew, blam.
A lot of what I've been doing is making a YouTube series specifically about Witch, where I've reviewed the comics, and I also talked about the differences between the first couple issues and the first season and all that. A lot of people are actually being introduced to the show for the first time through that, or the comics the first time. So
Yeah.
there's people experiencing it for the first time. Like now.
Is it still easy to find the comics? Would you go to eBay and be able to find them all? I'm sure that's.
Oh,
If
yeah.
they had a print run of 1 million, yeah.
Yeah, there was a website that had translated PDFs because unfortunately, I think they stopped translating them into English, at least, or stopped selling them in America after like 8 issues.
Oh.
Yeah, so the rest of the world kind of finished the story.
It's like Game of Thrones. Yeah, the TV show gets ahead of George Martin.
Yeah, and they are re-releasing them. Through Yen Press is the publishing company.
Yeah.
And they've been coming out since 2017. They've been re-releasing. So new arcs are coming out that we haven't read before in America. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned, was it Melinda from Second Season?
Yeah.
Melinda, yeah, whom we hadn't, and Narissa, whom we hadn't seen. We knew them from the comics, but I didn't know how Greg and the gang had worked on them. But I mean, by that time, in 2000, 2004, so that the last 4 years, we'd worked on 8 different series, and you can't keep up with them all. They air. But now, YouTube started in 2007, 2008. So a few years later, potential for letting people catch on to those things is there. And now most of the stuff that I've worked on, mostly I can call it up and find it and watch it and refresh myself. Although I'm sure people who are much more familiar with the show and who have actually seen it in the last 17 years will find things that I've said today and go, what? No, that's not how it went. That wasn't her name. That's not how they pronounce it.
I know, that's what happens when you like look at it religiously almost.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I've met people who I met the guy. I bought a record, my first record, when I was 7 or something in England. Daryl and I are both born in England, both grew up in Canada. So we have this common, kicked out of a lot of countries. And one day, when I was in my 50s, I met the guy who recorded the song that I heard on the radio in England and went to the record store and bought this record, and I wore it out, So I went to a thing, and there he was, playing a guy named Ian Whitcomb. And I went up to him afterwards and said, Mr. Whitcomb, hi. I was a big fan, and the very first record I ever bought as a kid with my pocket money, I went out and got You Turned Me On, your first record. And he went, huh.
Oh.
It's like, you can't expect it to be as exciting for the people who were there. And he may have even had a bad time recording that. And maybe the musicians were jerks. And maybe they didn't ever pay him. I don't know. And to meet somebody 50 years later who was excited about it, I was expecting him to go, I guess I was half expecting him to go, oh, really? That's amazing. I remember that year. No, too much time had passed. And also, as Bismarck said, those who love the law or sausage should not watch either being made. And those who love TV probably shouldn't poke around too closely at the procedure, because you find out it's an office job. It's an office job. When it comes out the other end, it's sometimes magical. And sometimes not. I mean, we were working on Gerald McBoing Boing that year, I think, and something called Nano Boy in Singapore, and just terrible projects. But they paid money. I got to say I was in showbiz. So
anyway, it's been wonderful talking to you. You're very human.
And thank you for the thoughtfulness and the preparation, and thanks for your ongoing interest. And to you and all the other Witch fans, best of luck. Best of magical, transforming, grown-up, good, beating evil luck.
Yeah.